Hello, my friends. Welcome to episode 75 of the Nourish and Strengthen podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about macros, macro tracking, what they are, why we do it. If you are new to macros, my goal with this episode is to give you an all encompassing guide to exactly how to start. And if you are not new to macros, I don't want you to count out this episode quite yet because I'm hoping that you get some good reminders and you learn some new things as well. So, if you have heard about macros, maybe you're kind of confused about them, this episode is for you. So I know that macros and tracking macros can feel very overwhelming at first, but I promise when you just break it down into the simple steps, it's going to feel so much more manageable than it feels right now when you're just starting out. Okay, so let's just go ahead and dive right in. First of all, I want to kind of go back to the very beginning and talk about, well, first of all, what are our macros? Macros stands for macronutrients, and we are tracking mainly three macronutrients. That's protein, carbohydrates, and fats. So protein is super, super important because it helps our body build and repair tissue, specifically muscle tissue, right? I mean, it helps all sorts of tissues and it has all sorts of other benefits for your immune system, for general healing, things like that. But the benefit we're going to talk about today is building and repairing muscle. Our carbs are our body's primary energy source. They're the easiest source of energy for our bodies and the quickest as well. And then fats are really important to help support our hormone health and our brain health. Okay, so if you've ever been on a super low fat diet and you notice like your hair starts falling out, your nails get really brittle, or you can't think properly, it's because those fats are so low. So when you're tracking macros, it is really important to get an appropriate balance of all three macronutrients, okay? Because they all have their different purposes, right? Balancing that energy intake is going to give your body the nutrients it needs to feel its best, function at its best, and really help you thrive, okay? So, the amazing thing with tracking macros is that you can still enjoy your favorite foods while still making progress to your goals. I know you guys probably hear me say that all the time, but it is absolutely true. So, if you are counting calories, that's kind of like not, I don't want to say outdated or old school method, but it's something that we've been doing for a long time, right? Like think Weight Watcher points. That's kind of a sophisticated way of counting calories, right? We've been doing that since the 90s, maybe even before that. I don't even know. But controlling calories can help you lose weight. Okay. If you add in tracking your protein, that can actually control your body composition and making sure that that weight you're losing is primarily from your fat storage, your stored body fat, and not lean tissue. Okay. Now you want to look at protein and fat, or fat and carbs as well, for the benefits that I mentioned before, energy and hormone health. Okay. Something that we do with our clients is I call it modified macro tracking. So this is something, it's a unique thing that we do that makes macro tracking even easier. Okay. So instead of tracking and focusing on hitting numbers for your carbs, your fats, your protein, and your calories, what we do in my coaching program is we focus on just two things. We focus on calorie intake and protein intake because there's a ton of research that shows that if you're in a calorie deficit, you'll lose weight, kind of like I was just mentioning before with the calorie tracking, right? And if your protein needs are hit, if you're getting sufficient protein, you are going to lose more of that weight from body fat, right? It doesn't really matter, according to the research, if the remaining calories you're consuming come from carbs or fats. Now, both are important, and we want to make sure we get a balance of both. I'm going to go into more of that detail in a minute. But as I talk through all the things I'm going to say, think mainly about tracking your calories and your protein. That's going to make it feel so much less overwhelming. Okay. So why does tracking macros work? It does. Why does it work more than like intuitive eating or just, using a plate method or just being aware of your intake? Because tracking macros, not only does it help you understand how much you're eating, but you're also going to be focusing on where those calories are coming from. So you're going to see on a day when maybe you have very low carbs and your energy levels are low, you can tie that together. You can understand, okay, my carbs were lower this day, my energy was lower. Or the example I mentioned before, maybe you have really low fats for a series of time and you don't feel your best. And you start to notice different symptoms from that. You can tie together how you feel from the nutrients you're consuming, right? It also helps us balance our nutrition. So it's going to help you prevent overeating or undereating from one macronutrient. Okay. So the method I mentioned before, the modified macro tracking, if your calories are controlled and your protein needs are met, you're not going to be too high or too low on both fats and carbs, right? Because if you were too high on both fats and carbs, your calories wouldn't be where they need to be, right? Either your carbs and fats are going to be balanced, or one's going to be a little bit higher and one is going to be a little bit lower, or vice versa, right? So it's going to have that built-in balance for you. Okay. And then one thing you can do too is making sure, we're going to talk about targets in just a minute, but making sure that your fats don't get below a certain threshold, which again, I'm going to talk about in a minute, is going to help support that hormone balance. So just tracking in itself is going to give you that awareness of where your food is coming from, how you're feeling from it, and is going to provide balance to your nutrition while allowing you to choose the foods you want to have. Okay. So many good benefits, right? Now, let's go ahead and get started with how you actually implement this in your life. Okay, I'm going to break this down into a series of about 5 steps. Okay, that's it. So, first step is calculating your macros. So you need to know your goal, because you can calculate macros based on any fitness goal you have, whether that's weight loss, building muscle, or maintenance. I've heard from people that say before, oh, macros didn't work for me for weight loss. I'm like, well, macros, just the fact that you're tracking macros is not going to make you lose weight or gain weight or maintain your weight, right? You have to be having the right targets. And so my favorite way to calculate your target macros is to actually take 1 to 2 weeks and track what you're currently eating. And we're going to get into steps on how to do that in just a minute. So I would start out, like, let's say you want to start tomorrow, right? Take body measurements, take your weight, take some photos so you get an accurate starting point. Then I want you to open up an app. Again, I'll give you some ideas in just a minute, and track everything you're eating for 1 to 2 weeks, and then do body measurements, weight, and photos again. The reason why you have those intro and then 1 or 2 weeks later starting stats is because you want to know, okay, this is what I did, this is how much I ate, and this is the result it gave me, right? So let's say you start and you are 160 pounds, you track your macros, you're at about, approximately 2,000 calories, and you have the breakdown of the macros from there. And then you weigh in again in a week or two, and you are about the same, maybe 161, 159, around the same amount of pounds, right? You can assume that that is your maintenance calories. Okay. So let's say your goal is weight loss. You're going to cut about 15% or so off of that. I do have a quick start step for this. If you don't want to put in that time to learn what your maintenance is and to do that 1 to 2 weeks of tracking, you can just set your calories at about 10 to 11 times your body weight. That's generally a good starting point for most people. But again, everyone is going to be so different. If you are older, oftentimes you need fewer calories. If you are a smaller person, you need fewer calories. If you're shorter, you need fewer calories than if you are taller, younger, in a bigger body, that kind of thing. So again, it's going to be so unique to each person. That's why I do recommend tracking your macros for 1 to 2 weeks to try and estimate what your current maintenance is. Then once you have your calorie targets, then you're going to set your protein, okay? I typically like to set protein anywhere from 0.8 to 1 gram per pound of your current body weight. Okay. If your body weight's on the higher side, I would go towards that 0.8 times your body weight. If your body weight's on the lower side and you're leaner, you might be closer to 0.9 to 1 gram per pound. One caveat here is I do like to cap protein out for most females around 150 grams, just because I have found that most women don't really want to just be eating meat or protein shakes all day, right? And so if you are, 220 pounds right now, you don't necessarily need to be eating 190, 200 grams of protein, okay? So I like to just cap that off at about 150 grams, okay? All right, so let's assume you have your targets, or you're entering that week or two where you're going to track your macros and see where you are. And this is maybe when you're feeling, oh, I don't really know how to do this. I don't even know how to track my food. I'm going to break this down for you, okay? First step is finding an app you like. MyFitnessPal is very common. It's personally not my favorite for silly reasons. I just don't think it's very pretty or super user-friendly. I just don't really like the interface of it. I really like Macros First, and I really like MyNet Diary. Those are both really awesome ones. Also, you can use the free versions of all these. There is no need to pay for them. Okay. MyFitnessPal does charge for the food, the scanner, the food scanner. Macros First, I believe it's included on that one. Okay. So you've got your app, and then really first thing you're going to do is just kind of play around with it. Log some of your favorite foods. Maybe you typically have oatmeal for breakfast. You can scan the barcode on the oatmeal, or you can just search oatmeal, okay, oats, raw oats, something like that, to find your entry. In the beginning, what I want you to do though is compare it to the label on the food you're eating. So that's when it sometimes can get easier to just scan the barcode, right, to make sure it's matching the numbers on your food label. Because there can sometimes be some there can sometimes be some bogus entries in there. People can add what they want to these apps. And so you want to try to look for ones with a blue check mark. That means it's been verified by the app to be correct. Okay. So really for a couple days, I want you to just play around in your app, play around with finding the foods you're eating and logging them. Figure out your serving sizes, and just kind of put your food in there for a day or two without really worrying about where your totals are. Okay. So a couple tips when you're tracking. I would use a food scale. Okay. Food scale, it might sound very, what's the word? It might sound very like crazy, just kind of obsessive to use a food scale. But really, if you think about it, if you're going to do this, if you're going to go all in and track your macros, why wouldn't you want it to be as accurate as possible, right? Sure, you can use measuring cups and spoons, but those are not near as accurate as using a food scale. Also, more practically, you're going to use fewer dishes if you're using a food scale as well, because you can just zero out your food scale, add another ingredient, zero out your food scale, add another ingredient. It's so much simpler than using all sorts of different measuring cups, measuring spoons, things like that. Okay. So your first step, guys, find a tracking app and play around with it, right? That is your first step. Once you feel like you have found your common foods, it's going to get so much easier because the foods you're using all the time are going to come up to the top of your list every day. Okay. And you can also, if you have a meal you eat over and over again, you can copy it from one day to the next. You're going to find little tricks to just make it so much easier. So if it feels overwhelming at first, just know, I promise it will get easier. Okay. Most people I've talked to say it takes about 2 weeks and then all of a sudden it feels second nature. All right. So one more tip too to make this easier is focus more on consuming single ingredient foods instead of intricate recipes. The people who really struggle with tracking macros in the beginning are the ones who are like, well, I can't find my grandma's lasagna in here. It's not listed, right? Well, think about this. Think about having tacos for dinner, right? If you were going to log tacos, you could log 2 corn tortillas. You could use the barcode scanner, right? You could use your food scale and you could log 3 ounces of extra lean ground beef. You could use the barcode scanner on that again. You can log maybe 45 grams or 1.5 ounces of avocado, maybe a little bit of cheese, maybe a little bit of salsa, right? It's more single ingredients, right? As opposed to a recipe for corn chowder or something. That's a lot harder and it's still totally possible. It's a little bit more than I want to get into in this episode because it's more of an advanced technique, tracking and creating recipes in your app. So in the beginning, I highly recommend focusing more on single ingredient food recipes like tacos, like hamburgers, things like that, right? All right. First step, finding your tracking app and playing around with it, okay? Second step is focusing on one macronutrient first. So I would recommend focusing on trying to hit your protein goals first and spend a few days, even up to a week, to just focusing on increasing your protein. And you can watch your overall calories as well, sure, but just focusing on the one thing is going to help it feel so much less overwhelming to just think, okay, I'm just trying to get my protein targets to 120 grams. Okay. And so planning out your food in advance is going to be really important, and making sure you're hitting that protein. And once you're consistently hitting your protein, then you can start looking at maybe your overall calories, maybe your carbs and fat totals, that kind of thing. But focus on just protein first. Okay. Your next step is learning how to plan in advance. And actually, these two steps can kind of go together. You can do them at the same time. But taking 10 to 15 minutes the night before and putting in your food for the next day is going to be really, really helpful when it comes to understanding and learning how to track your macros, okay? Because what you do is you'll put in all your food. And so it's basically just as simple as thinking, okay, what do I want to have for breakfast tomorrow? I want to have oatmeal. I want to have a couple eggs. I want to have some berries. I'm going to put that into my app. What about lunch? Okay, I have some leftovers from dinner tonight. I'll have them for lunch tomorrow. So I'm going to plug that into my app. What about a snack? I might have this shake or this like turkey and cheese roll up or whatever. Put your snack in, put your dinner in. It's just thinking in advance, taking 10 to 15 minutes to put your food in there. The benefit of doing this is because you can look at your targets right then and there and think, oh, wow, I'm only at 80 grams of protein and I need to be at 115 or 130 or whatever it is. So you can go back to your protein entries and just bump up the serving size. Okay. So if you had 3 servings of meat with your lunch, bump it up to 4 to 5. If you had 3 egg whites with your breakfast plus an egg, maybe you do 2 eggs and 4 egg whites. You're just increasing the serving sizes of that macronutrient until it hits your targets. Okay. And then let's say you got your protein to where it needs to be. Maybe your calories are too high. So you go back to your carb and fat entries and you lower those serving sizes a little bit until your calories are where they need to be. Does that make sense? It's just a puzzle that you are manipulating the amounts of your protein and your calories until they are where you want them. And when you're planning in advance, it makes this so much easier. You have it all done the night before you go to bed, and then you wake up the next day and you just follow the plan. You have effectively created a meal plan for yourself that you can follow the next day without thinking about it. Okay. And if you get to the end of that day and you loved your food and you felt great and you got in all your macros and your calories and your protein, you can eat the same thing tomorrow. Makes it so simple to just repeat things. Okay. Plan on this taking maybe 10 to 20 minutes every night to plan your food, but it is going to get to the point where it might take you 5 to 10 after a couple weeks. It's going to get really, really quick for you. Okay. Step number 5 is just be patient and be consistent. If you continue doing this every single day, planning your food for the next day, putting it into your app in advance, making sure you're hitting your protein and your calories, it's going to get so much easier. Okay. If you keep quitting and never put in that 2 to 3 weeks of consistency, it's not going to get easier. It's always going to feel like this big, overwhelming chore, right? So be okay with it feeling overwhelming. Be okay with it taking some time and just stay consistent with it. And I promise it will get easier. Now, a quick word on fats. I know I mentioned not tracking your carbs and fats and not trying to hit certain targets, but then I also mentioned how important it is for hormone health, right? So I like to set a calorie goal, a protein goal, and then not let fats get below about 40 grams. Okay. When fats get below about 40 grams, that's when it's going to start negatively affecting your hormones if you stay there for too long. If it's just a day here and there, I wouldn't worry about it. But if you're consistently getting 30, 35 grams of fat, I would work on just including a little more healthy fat sources into your macros. Okay. Now let's talk about a couple common questions I get. One question is, do I have to track forever? Sometimes people are hesitant to start tracking because they don't want to have to track forever. And I personally do not want you to track forever. In my opinion, tracking macros is a tool that we use to reach a goal, right? When you have reached that goal, my goal for you is to help you wean off of tracking macros. Personally, I don't track macros unless I have a weight loss goal or I'm trying to just kind of fine tune my maintenance. Okay. And so that's a whole nother podcast topic to teach you how to wean off of tracking macros, but just know that it is absolutely not something you have to do forever, nor should you. Okay. So if you know it's just a short time, a tool to reach a goal, because what you measure, you can manipulate, right? And if you're measuring and manipulating your macros, you will reach your goal faster, okay? And then we can wean you off of that. Another question I get is, what if I go over or under my calories or protein? So I want you to be flexible in your approach to this. Don't look at this as all or nothing, a perfection mindset, because it's going to be really hard, okay? It's going to be really hard to be perfect with it every single day, and you're going to want to throw in the towel, okay? So a couple guidelines here. If you're over on your protein, that's okay. Don't worry about it, okay? If you've hit your calories, but you're under on your protein, what I want you to do is you don't necessarily have to go chug 40 grams of protein in a shake before bedtime. Just think, okay, I'm going to plan better tomorrow. Maybe you didn't plan in advance today and that's why you didn't hit your protein target. That's okay. Just sit down tonight, plan your food for tomorrow, and make sure you hit your protein tomorrow. Okay. If you're under on your calories, but you hit your protein, you have a couple options. Number one, if you're not hungry, I want you to just go to bed and plan better tomorrow, like I said before. If you are hungry, feel free to have another meal, and it's okay if you go over on your protein and it helps you hit your calories. Okay, so those are kind of three different common scenarios I hear, but really the overarching idea here is to just be flexible and know that you're looking for trends over time. And if you're off one day here and there, it's not a huge deal as you're learning. Okay. So a couple tips for success here. Number one, keep it simple. Like I said, single ingredient foods, simple things that you can either scan the barcode of whole food ingredients, or if it's something like an apple, you can find, obviously there's no barcode there, but you can just find apple and have the blue check mark next to it. Keep it simple. I promise it's going to make your life so much easier. Number two, plan ahead. Plan and prep ahead. If you can prep healthy ingredients, so you have things like rice, beef, chicken, potatoes, things like that on hand and ready to go, it's going to be so much easier to grab those out of your fridge and use those for your meals and track them. Okay. And tip number three is focus on quality, not just quantity. Okay. So really, even though you're tracking and technically you can fit in what you want, I want you to remember the 80-20 rule and focusing on 80% of your food should be whole food, nutrient dense food that fuels your body and helps you feel great. But the other 20% can be those foods that you love and that keep you satisfied. Because if I told you you could never have chocolate or a brownie or a treat again, chances are you wouldn't even get started on this journey. I wouldn't either, right? But we have to have those foods that mentally and emotionally satisfy us and keep us happy. And that can be, that 20% there, as long as most of our food is whole food, nutrient dense, high fiber. Okay. So to recap, you guys, tracking your macros, specifically protein and calories, is going to help you not only lose weight if that's your goal, but also make sure that the weight you're losing is coming primarily from body fat, right? And really just remembering, planning in advance, keeping things simple, and being consistent and patient with yourself, and knowing that it will get easier over time, but it's going to take a couple weeks of consistency, okay? And if you don't ever put in those couple weeks of consistency, it's never going to get easier. So hopefully that helps you guys. Please let me know on social media if it was a help to you. Hopefully this can be your go-to guide for things to remember and a little motivational, you got this, when it comes to tracking macros to help you reach your goals, guys. So I hope that was helpful for you, and I will see you next week.